Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth event of our series on the role of economic growth in the green transition. Today, we are focusing more on firms and regulation by asking the question, making money and saving the planet. What is needed to bring it together? I'm Sebastian from Decarbonizing Future Economy Forum, and it's my pleasure to guide you through this event this evening. For those of you who don't know the Decarbonizing Future Economy Forum, we aim to explore pathways on how to decarbonize our economy. For this, we bring together global thought leaders with a wide range of approaches and provide a shared platform to discuss their ideas. Some of you might have already joined us for one or several of our first three events. We explored differences and commonalities of green growth, post, and degrowth. We discussed with distinguished scholars as Professors Ottmar Edenhofer, Cameron Hepburn, Tim Jackson, and Susan Paulson, just to mention a few. If you want to know about steps, how to transition to a greener economy, check out these events by rewatching them on our homepage, decarb.world. To realize all goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, we rely on the cooperation of three main ingredients: ideas, regulation, and business. We discussed some ideas of green, post, and degrowth in our last events, and today we want to focus on regulation and business. What are the current incentives for businesses to change their ecological impact? How are these influenced by the current reporting scheme on ecological aspects? What can we do to improve the incentives towards a green transition while also enabling businesses to keep up? I am excited that we have two outstanding scholars and a sustainable firm as our guests tonight. Professor Giovanna Michelon, Christian Felber, and Alma Spiville from Retail. A big warm welcome to you. All of you give a short impulse presentation with their key messages in the first half of our event. After that, we will have time for discussion between the panelists with questions from you, the audience. Since this is a webinar, participants are muted and without video. But we are really excited to hear from all of you. So please do use the Q&A function where you can ask your questions and also upvote or comment the questions of others. So finally, this event is being recorded and the recording will be published afterwards on our website. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our first guest, researcher, Professor Giovanna Michelon, who will give the first impulse presentation. Hello, Giovanna. Great to have you here.
Thank
Giovanna researches on corporate social and environment responsibility, disclosure, corporate governance, and accountability. She has a professorship at the University of Bristol, has authored and co-authored articles in several leading field journals, receiving more than 4,500 citations. So today she will talk about the current social and ecological reporting scheme for firms and its incentives. What are the pro-ecological effects of reporting? You will hear about the pros and cons and how to develop the reporting standards further. Giovanna, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to start sharing my presentation. I think you can see it now. So in preparing for this talk, Sebastian asked me to articulate my reasoning around three key questions, and they're kind of big questions. So I'll do my best to try and address each of them in an efficient and effective way. The first question is really about what are the real effects of CSR reporting standards or sustainability reporting mandates. This question refers to the fact that increasingly policymakers are using disclosure regulation to steer the behavior of companies, especially when this behavior that is being accounted for creates some externalities whose cost is borne by others. And so real effects are a situation in which the disclosing entity changes its behavior in the real economy as a result of the disclosure mandate. And these real effects can be the intended ones, but can also be unintended. I have tried to group them up into three different types. The first one is really the fact that a sustainability reporting mandate may change the reporting practices. And so we could have a situation where disclosure before the regulation was not existent, and therefore the mandate could lead to either a drastic increase in the information provided, but if non-compliance cost is low, it could also lead to avoidance strategies or the use of a box-ticking approach. And so the firm reaction in terms of the reporting practices does depend a lot on the incentives that the firms has, as well as other institutional arrangements that may be or not associated with the disclosure mandate. A second real effect is essentially the idea that the disclosure mandate allows stakeholders to access new information or to access information in a more easily accessible way. And this increases the visibility of certain corporate actions. So there's more awareness that is being created. And there is some research that show that transparency mandates that are implemented via a corporate disclosure regulation, so a regulation that usually governs how firms provide information to capital markets, does improve awareness of social information. And so the specific channel through which the disclosure is being provided matters. And it's also important for those stakeholders that may not have a direct access to disclosure for capital markets, because it's essentially mediated. It gets picked up by intermediaries and the press. Of course, if the new information reaches the stakeholders, then they can update their beliefs or their preferences, their expectations, and they're not necessarily economic preferences. They could be social preferences. Obviously, not all stakeholders have the same power or salience against the firm, and therefore the extent to which the updates and the beliefs of the stakeholder may then further create sort of a reaction in companies depends on the power of these stakeholders. And this leads me to the third change, which is the third type of real effect, which is the actual change in the way in which companies may be running their operations and conducting their business practices. And essentially the idea that they could change the way in which they manage the externalities, so the social environmental impacts that are being created by their activities. And this could happen in response to stakeholder reaction or in an attempt to preempt expected reactions induced by the disclosure mandate. And so this could be essentially a direct consequence if the mandate affects a transaction with certain stakeholders. Think, for example, of a customer that has certain ethical values. However, firms may also change their behavior when the disclosure mandate indirectly affects the relationship with stakeholders. In other words, where there is some sort of potential change in, say, for example, future costs associated with reputation risk or regulatory risks. Now, having said that, in terms of the real effects, we also need to keep in mind that it's not just the direct fact that the regulation may have on firms, but the fact that disclosure mandates may have aggregate effects, which also consider potential spillovers affecting other firms. And these spillovers may not always be positive, in the sense that if firms that are not regulated end up taking on some of those externalities that the mandate was attempting to regulate, the aggregate outcome is not clear. And it could also the regulation itself could induce further social externalities. The academic literature on real effects is emerging, at least in accounting and economics, is a bit more developed. It's important to notice that a lot of the evidence that we have looks at very specific settings, and that means that it's quite rigorous in terms of internal validity, but there is a trade-off against the generalizability of these results. There are some useful reviews that I'm indicating here if you want to know more about this topic. The second question that Sebastian asked me to sort of address is essentially what is the purpose of sustainability reporting and who are the addressees of such reports. So traditionally, the accounting literature that started developed in the 70s conceived sustainability reporting as a way to address the information need of wider stakeholders, especially non-financial stakeholders, whose stake in corporate activities would not necessarily be financial. And so CSR reporting was sort of at its emergence in practice as much as conceptually considered as a way to report about how an organization affects the sustainability of the eco-social system in which it operates. And so it adopted an inside-out perspective, and it was mainly something building around accounting for externalities that by definition would not be included in traditional corporate reporting. And so here, information that is material for the stakeholders. The materiality is in terms of the impact that the action has for the stakeholders. In recent years, however, investors have become interested in how an organization are affected by sustainability issues, and that means how the value creation process is somehow entangled with sustainability issues. I suspect that some of the key sustainability issues have become so huge and so urgent and so complex that regulators and policymakers have stepped into this arena quite strongly, really increasing a lot of the regulatory risk around certain business activities. And so since these issues are also extremely interconnected and complex, it has become clear that we cannot tackle them without the support of the business world as much as the financial system. The stability of the financial system to a certain extent is under threat because of the ecological crisis that we are experiencing. But so what we are assisting now is that often sustainability reporting is conceived for investors' needs with an outside-in perspective. So how do we account for those dependencies that the company may have with the planet and the ecological system, and how much do they matter for value creation purposes? So here, the kind of the direction is different from the previous one, and the information that needs reporting relates to a common definition of financial materiality. These two perspectives, one I call accountability and one I call valuation, respectively, both have the potential for explaining theoretically why CSR reporting may bring some real effects. However, they both have some limitation as to whether that's actually going to happen in reality. So the accountability perspective emphasizes that the power differential between the stakeholders and those that are providing the account is such that a transparency action cycle may not take place because stakeholders will need more empowerment. They would be to have higher level of inclusion in the governance systems of business for their request to be considered by the firm. On the other side, investors are more powerful stakeholders, and they have more means to actively engage with companies. But the question arises as to whether investors are interested in assessing externalities, given that by definition externalities do not matter for financial performance, and they also would have to deal with very long-term issues that may happen in a very far away horizon. And this is a question as to whether investors have this ability to look so forward-looking. The last question is about how could reporting standard potentially allow us to move forward towards a more sustainable society. A lot of recent policy intervention focus on reporting to investors, perhaps a little less in Europe, but there are some big international players that are sort of bringing sustainability reporting to investor at the forefront of the scene. And because of what I just said, I do not think that widening the scope of what is being reported necessarily goes along with what is the purpose of reporting. And I'm afraid that we're looking at new problems, but trying to tackle them with all solutions. Of course, we need a financial system as part of the solution, but this bears the risk that the sustainability of our planet becomes a second order effect to the stability of the financial system. While the truth is that the two go very much hand in hand, if not actually stand in the reverse order. And if we do not understand this, we may never get get to neither of the two goals. There is a lot of disconnection between sustainability scientists, what they do, and what accountants do, both from a research and a practitioner perspective. And so I would hope that more interdisciplinary crossover interaction would happen. There's been a lot of talk about a disclosure around science-based targets, which is really interesting and important. There are some key principles that are important when it comes to sustainability reported in the context of an accountability perspective. One in particular I think is very important. It is the sustainability context principle that requires companies to report social and environmental performance in a way that refers to the context of sustainability. And this is important because it both drives the choice of the indicators that are being reported. For example, eco-efficiency indicators versus absolute pollution in relation to the capacity of the local or regional ecosystem to absorb that pollutant. But the other thing that is important, it also affects our understanding of corporate performance in the context of the limits and demands placed on environmental or social or economic resources at different level, whether micro or macro or global level. And so to conclude, together with reporting regulatory regime should also be considering perhaps other type of mechanism that provide the right incentives, but also perhaps come up when it comes to reporting to with more innovative out-of-the-box approaches, such as participatory governance models that would allow to come out with co-production of reports between companies and stakeholders. And these are just some examples of ideas that could work in this way. With that, I think I am done, and I will stop sharing my screen.
So thank you very much, Giovanna, for this interesting presentation and for sharing your insights on real effects and the state of current reporting. I really like how you emphasize that non-financial reporting can affect investment decisions and via this channel can change incentives for firms. Influencing investment decisions is a good start, but you also emphasize it's not sufficient to support firms' transition to become carbon neutral, as far as I understood you. So before we move to Christian's talk, I would like to ask you one question following up on your presentation. You already talked about your approach on how to improve the current reporting scheme. Now, imagine the European regulators would ask you for suggestions on what to do. Could you please summarize the 2 or 3 most important aspects that the current European reporting scheme on corporate social responsibility, short the CSRD, needs to change to support firms' ambitions to become climate neutral? Where should they go on?
Well, I really do hope that they will keep a stakeholder focus. To me, that's quite important, that the focus of the reporting, CSR reporting, does not miss the importance of stakeholders, and I would say society at large. So that's when, in a sense, that's where I guess the role of science would come up. So concepts like double materiality to me are quite important, and I hope they are going to stay, especially when it comes to adopting specific standards for sustainability reporting. The idea that double materiality entails is that there's going to be stakeholder engagement to identify which are the topics. So I'm hoping that standards for reporting would also tell companies how to properly engage with stakeholders in a way that is truly a two-way interaction. And then this is the last principle that I discussed earlier. The principle of the sustainability context to me is quite important. It's important because it does allow us, it drives the choice of indicators that we care about, but it also allows us to monitor the progress towards achieving certain sustainability related goals, not just sort of checking the eco-efficiency of a firm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you very much again for your answer. I'm sure we have more time to discuss with you later in the Q&A with our audience. I see we already have some questions. so please keep them coming and use the upvote function and comments. Let's move on to our second speaker, Christian Felber. Welcome, Christian.
Hi, Sebastian. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Christian is a researcher at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam and author of the book Change Everything, Creating an Economy for the Common Good, in German known under the term Gemeinwohlökonomie. Based on his book and further research, Christian will speak about how to improve the current reporting scheme by adding the socio-ecological balance to the commonly known financial balance of the firm. But this is more than theory. An active community of firms and auditors already live and develop the common good economy. About 400 firms, focusing on Europe now, is already using the common good balance sheet. Firms like Sparda-Bank in Munich or the outdoor clothes producer Vaude, or also our guest firm, the telecommunications and mobile internet provider Retail. They use the approach of the economy for the common good to do their non-financial reporting. So we are very keen to learn more about the potential of the economy for the common good. Christian, over to you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Yes, I would like to catch up with some of the aspects of Giovanna's contribution, but before I would like to start a little bit more from scratch, framing the discussion in the meaning of what are we actually talking about, what is the role of non-financial reporting, of financial reporting, what is the role of enterprises, and what actually is economy? Because I'm afraid that current leading textbooks don't offer even a definition of what economy is. They offer definitions of what markets are, but not what economy is. And as a consequence, there is a strong confusion. What is the goal of the economy, which is not defined? And if we have no definition of the economy and no definition of the goals of the economy, how can we measure success? So with this little confusion, I would like to start and also start sharing my screen and open up the horizon a little bit wider before closing it again and talking on the expectation of the revised Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. First of all, looking at the definition of economy, because if we are talking about economic considerations, we should not equalize them with financial considerations. Economy can be something bigger, and I immediately start with an offer of a definition. Economy is about the satisfaction of basic needs of humans within the planetary boundaries and on the ground of democratic values, respecting both these democratic constitutional values from human dignity to solidarity to justice to sustainability, and keeping within the planetary boundaries. That's our offer of definition. And and of course, this does not refer only to markets. So the economy can happen in common goods, in public goods and services, in households, and on markets. That's very important, first and foremost, because GDP, as the success measurement of economy, does not take into consideration if basic needs are met in households or on common goods or on other stages of the economy. And as a consequence of this much broader definition, the goal of economic activities shall be principally the common good. That's our proposal. Of course, it's a normative approach, but the current approach, as it is taught in economic education, that it's first and foremost about making money or increasing capital, is also a normative approach. There is nothing value-free about that. It's just a different value system that underlies the model of the economy which is taught in economic education. And there are at least these two approaches, and it is interesting to know that Aristotle already distinguished them. He wrote about two different concepts of economy. The first one gave name to both economy and economics. It's about oikonomia. And in an oikonomia, the common good is the overarching goal, whereas financial means like money and capital were just the means. But we should not mix them up with the goal, or let alone convert them into the goal, because if we converted financial means into the purpose and goal of economic activities, the business, then this, in the eyes of Aristotle, would not be economy anymore. It would turn into its opposite, χρηματιστική. Today we call it capitalism, and it's a very important distinction between capitalism as the opposite of a true economy, which actually by definition was an economy for the common good. And if you think that this is something which has no actual value and validity anymore, then just take a look into constitutions and ask our current contemporary democratic constitutions if they preach utility maximization and endless growth of financial indicators and GDP. And you will find no single democratic constitution does. On the contrary, the constitutions still tell the same story that Aristotle told, and they say literally that the whole economic activity should serve the common good. There is no exception to that rule, and it's a fantastic story for an economy for the common good, because it's already today the legitimate narrative and paradigm of the economy. And from that follows something absolutely key. From that follows, from the fact that the common good is the goal of the economy, of all economic activities, follows that economic success measurement has to measure the achievement of the goal and not the accumulation of means. This is something different, and the correct methodology always measures success according to the achievement of the goal. And that's why we propose to measure economic success on the macro level of a national economy with a common good product rather than with GDP, with a common good balance sheet for the intermediate level of companies before they do their financial balance sheet, and with a common good exam for every single investment before the financial risk assessment of an investment is done. Because measuring GDP, financial profit, and financial return of investment first and foremost, and considering it the success of the economy on the diverse levels, is methodologically wrong. Because the economy is about the creation of the common good, and it's not about accumulating means. In a capitalistic order, that would be correct. But according to our constitutions, we should not have a capitalistic order. We should not have a crematistic order. We should have an economic order. And that's why it's so key to distinguish economy from capitalism. And we developed, like other initiatives, a first common good balance sheet, maybe just one mentioning to the common good product. There are some indicators or measures on the macro level, like the Better Life Index, the Gross National Happiness, or the Sustainable Development Goals. And our proposal is to compose this common good product democratically, that the people decide which are the 20 sub-goals that will compose one day the democratically composed and defined common good product. Then we could methodologically easily derive the common good balance sheet for companies and the exam on in the financial sector from the national level, from the common good product. As today, this exercise has not done in any country. Our intermediate exercise has been to look up the highest democratic values that we have until today, which are the most frequent constitutional values, in the green horizontal line, from human dignity to solidarity and justice to environmental sustainability, which is just one constitutional value out of several, and transparency and co-determination. And then we apply in a scorecard these fundamental constitutional and basic democratic values to all stakeholders of an organization, no matter if it's a company, a municipality, a city, or a university. All these organizations have already done a common good balance sheet. And now, looking beyond our own approach, if you like, because we are just one private initiative next to others, next to GRI and B Corps and Future Fit Foundations and Global Compact, and trying to define the ideal requirements for a future unified, legally binding and obligatory standard that is not called Common Good Balance Sheet any longer, that is not called B Corp certification any longer, that is not called GRI report any longer. Maybe one of them, but not necessarily. At least technically, it will be called the legally binding non-financial reporting standard, or sustainability reporting standard, or common good reporting standard. This is still an open end. But we thought on the meta level, which should be the most relevant requirements of such a future CSR standard. And here you find the results of an IASS study, which I coordinated. I did not participate in, but I coordinated it from the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam. And probably you have already read some of these core requirements. Actually, there are 10, but I just put 9 on the slide. From Transparently Developed, this reminds me already of what Giovanna said about the co-production of reports. That's already indicating in this direction. Then the most important ones in our vision are that it should be universal. It should not skip out any relevant information like on property concentration or tax evasion or political lobbying or violation of working and human rights in the supply chain, just to name a few. All these really critical and very delicate issues should be in. That's universal. And then, of course, they should be comparable. And the most important point of the comparability is that companies that do better than others, they should enjoy a competitive advantage. But maybe before I dive into this last and most important requirement of all, in our view, I do on my second last slide a short criticism of the currently ongoing revision of the previous non-financial reporting directive, which will turn into the corporate sustainability reporting directive now. And some aspects of our analysis/criticism. 11,000 companies in the European Union were affected of the NFRD out of 22 million. So that was 0.05% of all existing companies. And now, according to the European Commission's own prevision, 50,000 companies will be affected. That's an increase to 0.2% of all companies. Well, you can form your own opinion how ambitious that is. Whereas in the NFRD, 7 frameworks, sustainability reporting frameworks were mentioned, but none had to be implemented. And also the content did not have to be checked by external auditors. Now there is an improvement. External auditors will have to check the content of sustainability reporting, but it's still opened if there will apply limited assurance or reasonable assurance, which we, of course, would prefer. And now one of the most critical points, the concrete standards, they should be formed in a delegated act by private limited company in Belgium, which is EFRAG, European, and now pay attention, European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. And that's interesting or disappointing because we are talking about sustainability reporting and not about financial reporting. And why commissions the European Commission, a private entity that has no expertise in sustainability reporting, but rather in financial reporting, to develop these standards. So this is very disappointing. It's a double disappointment because why don't the European Parliament, and where is my slide? Here is my slide. Why don't the European Parliament, together with stakeholders, maybe with a multi-stakeholder body, define these standards? They're absolutely relevant. They are not technical details. We are talking about human rights and labor rights and tax justice and gender relations and climate protection. So these are not technical details. These are absolutely political and ethical key questions. And in our opinion, the Commission should not delegate this legislation, but the Parliament itself, together with stakeholders from civil society, should develop them. And now the last point, even if the content will be checked externally and even if it will be defined as European sustainability reporting standards once the directive is ready. There is not even a discussion on the consequences of the result of the maybe comparable result of the sustainability report, or maybe not. And now comes our proposed solution. The result of the sustainability report should be equally measurable as a financial report. Of course, not in monetary terms, because then we would have to monetize all true values, human life, the extinction of a species, or the damage to the social fabric. We would have to give a price to it, and this is not our preferred choice. Our preferred choice is to evaluate how ambitiously a company engages for all these ethical purposes, and then to measure in points a company's ethical performance. And now comes the most important point. Today, those companies that engage more ambitiously in social responsibility and climate protection and sustainability and ethics generally, they have higher costs because they do not externalize these costs, and they have a competitive disadvantage in relation to the dumpers in all disciplines who do not pay so much attention to these fundamental values, what the economy actually is about. And that's nonsensical, that's counterproductive. These more ethical, responsible, and sustainable actors should actually have a market advantage, a price advantage on markets. And this is our first and foremost proposal to link the result, the quantified and comparable result of the sustainability report, to all these incentives which are already in place. Differentiated tax rates, differentiated market access conditions in terms of tariffs or others, different interest rates for bank loans to be listed up in stock markets only if the common good balance sheet or the non-financial report has a certain minimum result, priority in public procurement and subsidies, and so on and so forth, with the goal that the most climate-friendly and the most socially responsible companies should have a competitive advantage in markets. Then markets would function in the direction of the constitutional and democratic values of a society, and that would be our proposal. Economy for the Common Good was welcomed by the European Economic and Social Committee already in 2015. And just to show you some figures of the movement, we are a civil society movement, but our main approach was not from the perspective of a company, but from the perspective of society as a whole. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christian, for this very broad presentation and for sharing your clear ideas of the economy for the common good. As I understand, the economy for the common good is a very holistic approach to deal with many issues of our society and economy. It considers ecological and social aspects, as well as it is also a way to support corporate development together with stakeholders and shareholders. Today, we focus more on the potential to reduce the climate footprint of a firm using incentives. And you made a very clear point on how the policy in any country basically could already change the incentives for firms. I find two aspects especially important. First, it is possible to reorganize the taxing scheme for firms or the tariff scheme along a quantifiable balance of ecological and social behavior of the firm, the common good balance sheet. Secondly, the policy can provide additional incentives by considering the common good balance sheet in public tenders or procurement, as you said. For example, I imagine for new buildings or simply for the cleaning of a city hall or a school. I would like you to ask a question regarding that. What can firms already do if they do not want to wait for the political environment to catch up on these developments?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Maybe I first give an example that policymakers have already provided this better regulatory framework. The city of Portland in United States already puts a higher tax on corporations that allow a very high degree of inequality, a ratio of 100 between the highest and the lowest pays. They pay an additional 10% of local corporate profit tax, and they pay even a plus 25% of local corporate profit tax if inequality exceeds 250 times between the highest and lowest. So it already exists. And in the European Union, there is a directive for the added value tax, which allows three different tax rates. And why shouldn't there be one day a directive on the corporate profit tax, which allows 5 different rates in corporate profit tax? Now to your second part of your question, today we're not there. So companies still have to look for different incentives. And we have a broad spectrum from the most intrinsic motivation to do the common good balance sheet to the most extrinsic. The intrinsic motivation is they find meaning, and they finally are kind of confirmed in their value system, because there are many companies, and probably the majority of the small and locally anchored and embedded companies, they have a value system which is closer to our constitutional values than to economics textbooks. So for them, it's kind of a relief that finally there is a theory which fits to their value system, and they feel better, and they engage, and they find like-minded companies, not even necessarily within the ESG community. They also talk to B Corps, and they also talk to companies that do a Future Fit Foundation or a German Sustainability Code report. But more and more companies intrinsically engage for purpose, for ethics, and for sustainability. So this is a first one. A second one is already a pragmatic one. If they scan all their corporate activities on what they are actually doing and deciding, so it's not only an opportunity to improve their ethical performance, is as well an opportunity to improve all the processes, and in some points they even improve their financial productivity. That's also a side effect which we have been confirmed in some of our pioneer companies. The third one is that already today companies attract workforce which is more ethically oriented than the profit seekers, the pure profit seekers, especially younger people. They are looking for purpose and values, and they choose their employers according to the value system that is really irradiated by that companies. Same with clients and even investors, those who give finance. So everything is reported from companies that they find it more easily to attract all these stakeholders if they can tell them a more humane, a more ethical story. And the last one would be the preparation for when policymakers finally promote these activities. That's the famous first mover advantage. So some of the companies say, well, we are not completely convinced of this utopian story of the economy for the common good, but we feel that this one day will be a legal fact, and that's why we prepare to be the first ones, and we will have this advantage. This is the spectrum why companies prepare for this scenario in a near future. And yeah, that's my answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Christian. So there are plenty of motivations that should incentivize more firms to join your movement, to join the economy for common good. And I think we have plenty of more time for Q&A with you and Giovanna together in some minutes. But before we're doing that, I want to also welcome our third guest. I'm very glad to have Alma from retail here, and we can now learn more about the motivations of a firm that's actually applying the common good balance sheet. The retail is a provider of mobile telecommunications and internet service. Alma will share their experiences with the economy for the common good and how they create the common good balance. So it's great to have you here. Over to you, Alma. We cannot hear you yet, so. Or maybe it's just me.
No, I can't hear her either now.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, great.
Sorry.
Great. Yeah. Then again, thanks for being here and sharing your experience from retail.
Thank you very much for the Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry for the technical problems. I don't have any slides, so we'll just be talking. Yeah, with retail, which was only founded 2 years ago, so we are still a startup. We thought about becoming certified in any way already at the beginning. So we thought about what is the way we want to go that respects what our goals are, what our mission are, because the main reason why we founded retail in the first place was because we wanted to have an impact on a positive impact in our economy. So while working in the capitalistic world, still proving that there can be good companies that do provide common good and still are making profits. So we came across the Gemeinwohlökonomie or eco-common economy in the beginning when we were really young and found out that this is really a holistic approach, which does not only include the climate neutrality, which was really important for us because climate change is one of the main reasons we founded our company. But the holistic approach about this made it even easier for us while founding our company to build up a company that was good in every sense we could think of. So this was kind of a guideline, and we had a look at the matrix even long before we did the certification, which we did this year, so 2 years after founding. And going through the matrix in the beginning helped us establish our unique selling points or make them clearer to our possible customers, and also helped us discuss within the founding team, but also with our first employees, why we are doing stuff and how we are doing it. So when we actually came to the certification, we used the app of Good Balancer, which is also a very young company, and it made things a lot easier. And one experience that we came across, which is for us very important because it's maybe also feedback for Christian, is that it's kind of hard for a startup to get the certification because some of the points that you can actually achieve, you need to have like 5 years of experience to have the highest count. And that is kind of disappointing because if you start at a very high level, because you have high ambitions, you get rated lower than companies that started or that are, have a long history and that improved a lot, but are still not at being climate neutral, for example. So this was sometimes hard for us, but then on the other hand, while being reviewed from an external reviewer, we had a lot of discussions about this, and also were able to discuss some of the points and like made it clearer for us why it's so important that the rating is also based on experience, but also at some points there was the openness to discuss if maybe even a young company like ours can achieve very high points if we can prove that we are actually fulfilling all the criteria. So especially our ambition of being climate neutral, which is not easy because if you look at something like the German market where you have the mobile network providers like Telekom, Vodafone, there's under them there are people like us who provide the contracts for the mobile communication, but we are not operating the network. So overall, someone like Vodafone has a higher impact, so they could just change to renewables and become climate neutral themselves. But like it is always hard for big companies to change from one day to another. They have climate goals and they are really not bad, but it takes a lot of time. And we hope that small companies, like becoming climate neutral very soon or starting climate neutral, we can put a pressure, or like if you want to put it positively, a motivation in the market to make the big players move faster, because they see that people are interested in companies being climate neutral and being interested in common good. And that's not only because we are idealistic, but also because customers actually care about this. And that's a big statement that I think makes the point, and big companies do notice stuff like this. The filling out the matrix has changed some behavior in our firm. Also, it was one point where we started doing the matrix. We not only did it in the founders team, but also a lot of our employees were involved in writing the answers to the questions, and that brought a brighter understanding of the whole approach to the team, and that was really nice. And also, we learned a lot about things like change the contracts of our employees to make it even fairer than it was in the beginning, which were easy to implement, but someone needed to tell us how it's done, because we didn't have the time to research it. So there was a lot of small things that we could change very soon, where our reviewer helped us a lot. That's like very good experience for us, and I think a lot of young companies should be encouraged to actually take the certification, because I believe it's way easier to do it when you are still young or even in the founding years, because then you can build up the company to create common good and not only profit, because that shouldn't be the goal for any company anymore. And I actually agree that there should be extra taxes or anything like this to motivate companies, because we are externalizing costs for climate or social impacts of what we are doing. And if we don't put a price on that, we're just using common goods for free, and that's not fair to anyone. So that's why I think a lot of companies, even young companies, should start with doing the scheme, and maybe there's an option to have like a light version for startups, which makes it a little bit easier to do it. But I would encourage everyone to do it, because it also made us build a stable company, because we have a lot of aspects we already thought about during the certification. Yeah, that's the experience, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alma. I think that shows perfectly aspects we already touched before, that it's a measure also to develop, in this case, a young firm, and you can profit from all the feedback that the reviewer takes from the reviewing, also from other firms. So yeah, there's a kind of network effect. And I would like also to ask you one question that is related to the potential costs that I would expect you have, because there's an auditing, and also the second thing is that you said you're climate neutral, so there's also, I guess, some additional costs by doing that. Usually reporting costs time and effort, and it might be hard within a competitive environment. So this is also one key reason why company associations like the Association for the German Industry, the BDI, criticize the extension of non-financial reporting. The new CSRD framework creates additional costs and effort, and that might be an issue, especially in a competitive environment in international competition, especially for the German export industry. So the common good balance is another non-financial reporting scheme, but I would also expect here to have some additional costs. So can you tell what percentage of your costs are due to the economy for the common good framework, and also the second part of your efforts to reduce carbon emissions? And if you think of a highly competitive industry, what I expect you are in, with telecommunications and internet service, basically many firms can do this with not so much effort, but yeah, you're the expert. So how do you cope with these extra costs in this competitive environment?
Thanks for the questions. Starting with the actual costs for the certification, they are actually not high. So even the external auditing was, I think, below 2,000 euros. What really was what we had to take was like 2 months of full-time equivalent to actually write the whole balance. So that's what really cost us a lot, but also brought so much positive aspects. So that's really not cost. So I think it's quite cheap actually, and it doesn't get so expensive even if you are a bigger company. And for the climate neutrality, we are spending about 10% of the product pricing of our mobile contracts are actually going into climate neutrality, but that's also one of our unique selling points. So it's not really additional cost because our customers are demanding it. Like if you are wanting renewable power at your home, you're also paying a little extra, but you also have a good conscience, you know why you're doing it. And yes, the mobile communication in Germany is a very highly competitive market, but the differentiation up to now is mainly due to pricing and the gigabytes you're getting in your contract. So it's always about getting more or getting it cheaper, and not about getting it in a better way or like doing something for the common good or anything like this. So we have a really differentiation, and it's only about making that clear to people, because a lot of people are actually willing to pay a little extra if they see what you're doing, if it's transparent, and if they can believe in what you're doing. Certification is a good way to make people believe, because they can actually check that you did it.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing also this experience. And I would stop now for the moment to ask my questions, and would like to move over to the questions from the audience. So far, we don't have so many, so please feel free to add some more. Don't be shy, so it's your chance. Otherwise, I think we will go on in some discussion later between our panelists. So I want to thank my colleague Henriette, who's actually going through the Q&As. And which question do we ask now? So I maybe start with this one. So we have a question from Christiane. Giovanna, could you give an example of what you mean by increased stakeholder integration in reporting?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking that when it comes to understanding which topics, so the definition of the content of a sustainability report should be done in consultation with the stakeholder, rather than sort of being somehow decided by the firm, and therefore the creation, the content really of the report is co-produced with the stakeholder. Now, I guess the audience is familiar with the materiality matrix that the GRI, for example, recommends. But this materiality matrix, the identification of the material items, isn't a one-way kind of, isn't supposed to be a one-way kind of process, but it should be coming out of focus groups and engagement and dialogue with the stakeholders. I don't know, Christian, you may have further insights on how to integrate the stakeholders in the process, but this is what I'm thinking of.
Yes, actually, I do, and I just prepared a slide on that. Thank you, Giovanna. To throw the ball, I'm sharing my screen once again, and maybe Sibylle wants to say something on that from the practical perspective. What I want to share is the last column on the right side. It's about transparency and co-determination. And as you can see in the scorecard, that's not only within the company, that would be line C, related to employees, but it's related to all stakeholders. So actually that's the practical, the practical implementation of what Giovanna proposes. And maybe one further explanation on the logic of the balance sheet. these 20 topics, common good topics, which are the most important topics, they are differentiated in almost 40 aspects. They are finer. And in transparency and co-determination, for example, companies can just disclose relevant information within the company or to external stakeholders. That's the first step. A second step, they could include them in the form of listening to their opinion. The third step of achievement would be that that they give them a vote in strategic decisions. And the highest and final step would be that even the decision-making bodies of the company are elected by stakeholders. So this is a concrete example how the Common Good balance sheet deals with this issue. The concrete example was now on internal democracy, but the same logic holds true for external democracy. And I would like to share this second slide on this topic, because this is the adjustment of the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, with the 20 topics of the Common Good balance sheet. And in the same row on the in the same column on the right side, transparency and co-determination, you see that there is a quite poor representation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is the counter indication that democratic participation is not among the strongest goals of the SDGs, at least not as strong as we have integrated in the Common Good matrix, which is our scorecard.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have another question that would now go to Christian. What are the implications for economic growth on a firm and economy level of the Common Good economy? Would it be a vehicle for degrowth? So that's also about your relation to the degrowth movement.
Yes. So I have two answers on that question. First on the company level, and then on the macro level of the whole economy. First, the Common Good balance sheet is not the only regulatory instrument for companies in the Common Good economy approach. There are very diverse ideas, proposals, instruments, and also concepts. And one concept or a whole array of facets of the new paradigm of a company, which is an organization not to maximize financial profits, like it's in the textbook of Pindig and Rubinfeld, for instance. A company is an organization which ought to contribute in the maximum degree possible to the common good, which includes the well-being of its employees, which includes the well-being of its stakeholders, which includes a meaningful product or service of high quality. That's all part of the common good. And then we go on. On the base of that, every company should define its optimum size. What's that? So it should not try to grow as big as possible, but it should try to define and then find its optimum size. And how can a company know what its optimum size? And then again, it needs an instrument, and the instrument is a set of questions. And the questions are, with which size the quality of the product or the service is best? At which size the climate, the humane climate, the working climate in the company is best, where people feel most comfortable? At which size the carbon footprint and the whole ecological footprint is the lowest, and so on and so forth. But maybe many companies would come to the conclusion that staying smaller makes more sense than growing to the maximum. They don't need to grow anymore, because if the best common good balance sheet result is not for maximizing profits, but for maximizing contribution to the common good, then all companies are kind of released from the force and the coercion to grow. And if they cooperate with other companies, then they are rewarded for the cooperation. If they try to crowd other companies out and compete against others, then they get less points or even negative points. I didn't mention that. So the whole logic of how a company behaves on markets helps the company to find its optimum size. For some companies, it will be a bigger size, but for many companies, it will be a smaller size. And then they can rely on cooperation. If one company shares even means of production with other companies, then this would all of a sudden create trust among companies. And tomorrow that other companies or a third company will share means of production with this first company, which makes the first step. So a full new logic will evolve in the ecosystem of companies. And that's my, maybe a very concrete example, because we are talking about real life examples as well. One company with the indicator of ethical client relations shifted from the traditional approach, which is taught in marketing textbooks, to maximize turnover, to maximize sellings and purchases, to selling what the clients really, really need. And this has several implications. First, the consequence was that sometimes the outcome of the question to the client was, they don't need this product now. Maybe they need it in a year, but not now. Or they don't need this product, but a product from a competing company. But honesty is more important and empathy is more important than maximizing selling. So they forwarded this client to a different company, trusting that maybe tomorrow another company will forward clients to them. Third effect was the client recognized that they need something completely different, which has nothing to do. Maybe they were trying to buy a car, but actually they needed nature. So they made a completely different life choice. And the fourth option was they don't need anything at all. They just follow the habit to go shopping, and that came out. And the surprising effect was that this company did not even diminish its sellings, but it remained stable, because they of course did not make some sellings, but clients started to trust that company, and that increased the stability, also the financial stability of that company. And now, from the perspective of the macroeconomy, which is even the more relevant answer to the post-growth question, post-growth in ecological terms is part of the set of goals of the common good product. When GDP rises, the probability that the consumption of biological resources rises as well is almost 100%. We know there is relative decoupling, but there is no absolute decoupling. We know that from empirical research. But the common good product can only rise if the absolute consumption of biological resources shrinks. So that's short. So a more sustainable, a more profoundly sustainable economy, and even a degrowth economy, is the precondition of a higher success of a common good economy. So that's the functioning of the common good product. And maybe a last idea how this could be implemented in a market economy using market forces is one of my favorite ideas, is the idea of ecological human rights. Ecological human rights is a third generation of first political and then social, cultural, and economic human rights, would mean that the limited amount of biological resources the planet gives to humans without degrading planetary ecosystems. This gift is shared among all human beings as an ecological per capita budget. And this budget we would have to translate into ecological purchase power, which is distributed every year to all humans. And then all humans have the same right to consume this yearly ecological consumption right. Of course, we would have to translate the ecological consumption unit into their accounts. But even if all humans consumed all their ecological consumption rights in 1 year, the planet would stay within the ecological planetary boundaries that Kate Raworth calls the safe space, or strong and deep sustainability. And if that was introduced, then people would have independently from the financial purchase power, they would have a limited ecological purchase power. And as a consequence, they would only buy those products from companies and services from companies with a very low ecological footprint. And thanks to this concept, we could use market forces to stay within the planetary boundaries. And this is just another instrument to show that the economy for the common good is more than just the common good balance sheet.
Giovanna, Alma, do you want to react to Christian's suggestions?
If not, I would like to pose a question to Giovanna. But
so we have other questions, but if you would like, Giovanna, you can go on.
So I ask Giovanna something. Yeah, because this was now kind of going very far, and maybe to trace us back to the core of our discussion and also to Giovanna's input. I had on my slide that the concrete standards for the future sustainability reporting standard of the European Union are now developed by EFRAG, European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. And I already criticized why not using experts with expertise in sustainability reporting, like framework developers, like Future Fit Foundation or us, like scholars as Giovanna or myself, like business federations that are striving for the common good, and other stakeholders, and create a multi-stakeholder body, which is called European Sustainability Reporting Advisory Group. And then a delegated legislation would make sense rather than being the standards created directly by the European Parliament and the European Council. But I would like to listen to Giovanna's opinion on that topic.
I mean, I don't know why this is happening. I mean, I can speculate about why this is happening. I think what we need to consider is that when it comes to financial reporting, we have the International Accounting Standard Board, that is the one that prepares the IFRS standards that we use for financial reporting. And you may know that the IFRS Foundation recently, at the end of last year, sent out a consultation paper on sustainability reporting that it's essentially that focus on investors that I was sort of discussing about in my presentation. They have now formed a sustainability standard board, and they're going to start working on releasing some standards for sustainability reporting that are aimed to investors. Therefore, it's not clear to me what's going to happen in the big scheme of things with the IFRS moving into the sustainability reporting arena, EFRAG at the same time working on some standards. There are the technical groups in EFRAG, I have to say, are quite diverse. There are not many academics, but I think right now, actually, perhaps it's tomorrow the deadline. They have a position open if, any of you may want to take part into their developing standards work. As I said, I do wish that this sustainability reporting directive, CSR reporting directive, will not overemphasize the focus on investors, because we know that a focus on investors will leave something unaccounted for, because externalities typically are not something investors care about. But I very much agree with what your sort of concern about what's happening there. But at the same time, I'm hoping EFRAG is trying to embed some ecological literacy in what they're doing. That's what I'm hoping.
Thank you.
Okay, then we will have a set of questions to Alma that relates to why do you think that not other firms or more firms take up the approach of the economy for the common good, and what do you think how more firms could become convinced to join?
I think that one thing is that certification is very challenging. It's not cost-wise, but it takes a lot of effort, and you have to put some work into it. And some companies might be or might hesitate to do it because it internally costs them money. I think one thing I said before, which could make it easier to convince more firms, is actually going into startup accelerators and making it more visible how you can do it. And I think the Good Balancers, who did the app in which you can fill out the matrix, they help a lot because they make it easier for young firms. And then actually one thing that is already in the matrix helps, because as Christian described in the last column, you are actually motivated to talk to your partners about common good. And that's one thing we just recently did. So we presented them that we are getting certified and that we need some information from them. And we talked about it and they were fascinated. So we actually made it like small kind of workshop and talked them through the whole matrix, and they are try to rate themselves how they can see them. They are like a middle class firm and more conservative, I would think, but learning about this makes it easier for other firms to understand. I think this needs a lot of mouth-to-mouth propagation, but also just some more representability in the media and stuff like this. So I think there's not enough focus on how we can change the world, and it's not only climate we need to save from, but there's a lot of other aspects. And I think the focus needs to be on this. But one thing that might actually help, I don't know if a lot of people here know about it, but there's the purpose, where you can become a purpose company, and this also saves us from being too concentrated on the profit, but more being concentrated on the purpose. And that's something that might go into policy after voting in Germany, for example, because there are a lot of parties that take part in this. So lobbying for this kind of certification is also an important way to help firms do it, because they might in the future have smaller taxes or something like this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would now like to take up a more broader question, and that's unfortunately also related to your last statement before we will end our session. So take a minute or two to answer this question. And we heard that, for example, all of you would say that some things have to happen. The question is, what would be the next steps that you see that need to become realized to make businesses more sustainable? And this also includes a question from the audience. What's needed to shift politics also into that direction? So please feel free to answer to the part of the question that you feel comfortable with. Why don't you start, Giovanna?
I mean, I am an optimistic, and so I hope that exactly how we were able to tackle another big environmental challenge a few years ago, that was the problem with the ozone. I'm hoping that things will move. Definitely, there is an individual responsibility on each of us to do our part for what we can do as managers, as professors, as organizers. But what I, in a sense, what I'm trying to do, for example, and something that I really care about, is this idea that new business professions will have to develop some ecological literacy in order to be able to understand how business and the natural environment are somehow related. And so to me, that's an important aspect that I try to include in the way, in which I approach my own profession and when I teach with my students. And so I'm hoping that this idea that we are part of the planet, we are not something different from the planet, and this idea of ecology rather than separation between nature and economy, if you wish, will become something that we can all work on politically as well.
Thank you. Christian?
Yeah, maybe as we're working on diverse levels, I would like to propose a possible next step on each of these levels. On the level of companies, probably the most impactful thing we can do is to give a stage to pioneers companies and to listen to Alma. And this is usually extremely motivating for other companies. And I was personally now impressed that one of your motives was to kind of nudge between nudging and forcing those big corporate players to become sustainable too. This is a great story. And I like some of your words were really impacted me. So you said that they use common goods for free, and that's not fair. So this is a very strong story, and just telling it will have its impact. We are working also with political actors, like the city of Cologne very recently decided to do the common good balance sheet for public companies in the city of Cologne, and it's not the first city that is doing that. The same is happening in Barcelona, in Amsterdam, in Vienna, and Münster in Germany is the first city which has decided to do the common good balance sheet for all of its public companies. That's really a great success. Barcelona has done it after doing the common good balance sheet for the very city. So they first made the experience for themselves and to have some experience and expertise. And now they are promoting private companies who do the common good balance sheet. In Münster, they already announced to reconfigure public procurement decisions and economic promotion decisions according to the result of common good balance sheet. As far as I know, but maybe Giovanna can say something on that too. There are only 3 standards that have a quantified and comparable results, because it's not only about transparency, it's also about differentiating sustainability performance. And as far as I'm informed, only B Corp's Future Fit Foundation standard and Economy for the Common Good balance sheet have a quantified and comparable result. And this is a perfect offer to policymakers to link diverse incentives to these differentiate results. And the last one, as we have a professor from a university amongst us, we also have a scientific community which comprises already more than 500 scholars and scientists. So you're warmly welcome to join this community. Maybe we have a follow-up on that. And there is also first chair Economy for the Common Good at the University of Valencia. And that's, of course, quite ambitious. But of lower, a lower degree of ambition would just to include in a course of business administration or management or any other course of economics that students do a common good balance sheet or a similar instrument for local companies. This prototype was developed at the University of Applied Sciences of Münster and has been copied by at least 5 other universities and the University of Kassel. They got a national education prize for that format. So it was it's not only a prototype that works, but which is very attractive for students and which was rewarded for its impact as sustainable education.
Okay, thank you. I would take now Alma, and then if you want to reply to that, Giovanna, you can have a minute again then. Alma.
That is really important. One aspect I would like to add and emphasize the optimistic view of Giovanna is that I see that a lot of young people, or actually more and more people, care about what they are working at. They are not only want a job where they earn money, but they want also a purpose in what they are doing. And this is comes perfectly together with this certification regime, because they are looking for companies who also try to achieve a higher purpose and not only profit. And that makes, first of all, your employees more efficient, more motivated, because they are not only motivated by money, and also they enjoy their work. So it's a really nice work environment by itself, and it's real teamwork. So democracy comes more and more natural in the work environment, and the more people want to work in companies that have a purpose and not only profit ambition, the more or the harder it gets for companies that don't have a real purpose besides earning money to get really good employees. And this is one thing that's already starting, that we can see in the market, that it's for us actually easy to require new employees because a lot of young professionals want to work in a nice work environment and for a higher purpose. And this kind of accelerates development, and that's something that makes me very optimistic for the future.
Thank you, Alma. Giovanna, I'm not sure if you want to reply to Christian.
Well, I mean, there's not much. I mean, I can sort of support what he was saying, and that is true. I also, it kind of, just an additional comment, kind of made me think that there are now a lot of rating agencies that allegedly are measuring ESG performance of this company, where in fact they are not really doing that. They are measuring the exposure to ESG risk that company has. So they've really changed a lot compared to what they used to be when they were first founded, and they were targeting a special type of investor that was interested in socially responsible firms. And so in a sense, what Christian was saying is even more relevant at that point. And we need to be very careful when we hear ESG performance, when we hear sustainability reporting. It goes back to being sure what we're talking about, because to me, sustainability reporting remains something that deals with sustainable development of the planet, of our society, and not of businesses as such.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I would love to talk with you all more about the future economy, but I think we should make a stop here. And I have 3 key takeaways from our session together. And the first is that we have some regulatory development at the European level with the new CSRD framework for non-financial reporting, but it's not sufficient. It's still too few firms applied, and especially the real effects to enhance more sustainability of firms are minor. So we need to broaden our perspective beyond the investors' ones. The second is that we already have ideas like the economy for the common good to develop non-financial reporting further into a quantifiable measure that can be used to set the right incentives for firms. There are still others, but I think we should go on to discuss how to make this happen. And finally, we also have an example of detail that shows that firms do not need to wait for those things to change, for the regulators and the policy to catch up. They can already start to decarb into a purposeful future economy. So that was our Decarb Future Economy Forum. In the name of the organizing team, I would like to say a really big thank you for your time and your interesting insights. I also want to thank my colleagues at the Decarb Future Economy Forum for this event, specifically Sophie, Christiane, Maria, Henriette, Alex, Paul, Niels, Anna, Oliver, Tobias, and everyone else who has been working very hard behind the scenes to bring this event to life. Finally, I would also like to thank our partners for their support. Thank you to the Think Lab of the Stiftung der Deutschen Wirtschaft and E.ON Stiftung. Thank you to the Center for Sustainability of the Hertie School of Governance, Berlin, the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change, the NCC, the Zoe Institute for Future Fit Economies, and the German Institute for Economic Research, the DIW. As you might have noticed, our focus for this event was Europe, its regulation and businesses, but the ideas we heard are not limited to some region. We are keen to also broaden our picture beyond European borders, and therefore invite you to support this ambition. The Decarb Future Economy Forum is a student-run initiative with people from dissertation phase to master students. If you are interested in our topics and organizing these kinds of events, please get in touch via email at info@decarb.world. Now, the next event at the 14th of October will discuss how bold and future-proof Europe's Green Deal really is. Is the European Green Deal as ambitious as it claims and enough to keep the EU within limits of the Paris Climate Agreement? Or does it perpetuate ideas responsible for climate change in the first place? Our guests will be Professor Claudia Kempfert from the DIW Berlin, Ulrike Herrmann, a journalist from the Taz, and Antoine Colombani, a member of the cabinet of Franz Timmermans at the European Commission. Elizabeth Durst, senior consultant at the Zoe Institute for Future Fit Economies, will moderate the event. So stay tuned and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be notified about our upcoming events. In the meantime, you can also visit our website, decarb.world. There you will find the recording of today's event and past events, as well as written summaries. So thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and your engagement, and I wish you all a lovely evening. Goodbye.